What happened to 16-year-old Karlie Gusé the night before she disappeared? That's the question that's been haunting investigators since 2018, because every single person who was there tells a different story. Her stepmother says she picked up a paranoid, frightened girl from a party. Her father believes someone laced Karlie's marijuana with dangerous drugs. Her biological mother thinks something sinister happened at home. Meanwhile, a recording captured Karlie's own words that night, expressing her terror and conviction that someone would kill her if she slept. But here's what makes this case even stranger: when Karlie vanished the next morning, she left her phone at home. What teenager runs away without their phone? The family members later appeared in FBI video series and TV interviews, but their stories kept shifting. Which version of events is actually true? The answer might lie in a single phone call that changed everything. The panic call that started everything around 8 p.m. on October 12, 2018, Melissa Gusé's phone rang with a call that would change everything. Her 16-year-old stepdaughter Karlie was on the other end, voice shaking with panic. She was at a party, something had gone terribly wrong. She needed to be picked up immediately. Earlier that evening, Karlie had refused a ride to the football game, but now she was begging for help. Here's where the story gets complicated, because everyone who was there that night remembers it differently. Melissa's version of events paints a picture of a girl consumed by paranoia. During the car ride home, Karlie couldn't sit still. She kept switching seats, held her phone flashlight outside the window, and pleaded that the car would kill her. Every few minutes, she'd crane her neck to look out the back window, searching for threats that may or may not have existed. Melissa describes driving through the quiet streets of Bishop, California, while her stepdaughter spiraled into deeper fear with each passing mile. But Donald Arrowood III, Karlie's boyfriend who was also at the party, tells a completely different story. According to Donald, Karlie got scared of the music and got scared of me. Think about that for a moment. This was her boyfriend, someone she trusted, and suddenly she was afraid of him. What could have triggered such a dramatic shift in her perception of someone so close to her? The other party guests add another layer to this puzzle. One friend described Karlie as simply stumbling around and acting silly after smoking weed, the kind of reaction you might expect from someone who overindulged. But another witness described her as genuinely terrified, consumed by fear rather than just confused by drugs. There's a crucial difference between being disoriented and being consumed by terror. The first suggests an accidental bad reaction. The second suggests something far more sinister. Here's where things get really interesting. Why would witnesses at the same party, seeing the same girl on the same night, describe such dramatically different behaviors? Were they all looking at different moments throughout the evening? Were some witnesses trying to protect themselves or others by downplaying what really happened? Or were they simply remembering events through the filter of their own experiences and biases? The timeline of that evening becomes even more problematic when you examine the details. Melissa says she received the panicked phone call and immediately drove to pick up Karlie. But exactly how long was Karlie at the party before she became frightened enough to call for help? These might seem like minor details, but in a missing person case, timing can be everything. Consider this alternative explanation: what if Karlie's reaction wasn't caused by marijuana at all? What if something else happened at that party that made her so desperate to leave? The varying witness accounts could suggest that different people saw different stages of whatever was happening to her. Maybe the witnesses who described her as simply high saw her earlier in the evening, while those who described her terror saw her later, after something specific occurred. Donald's account raises particularly troubling questions. If Karlie became scared of him specifically, what does that tell us about their relationship? Was there something about Donald that suddenly frightened her, or was her altered state making her perceive threats where none existed? His version of events places him in an uncomfortable position, as someone Karlie feared in her final hours of normalcy. The party location itself adds another element of mystery. This wasn't some massive house party with dozens of strangers. It was a smaller gathering where most people knew each other. In theory, this should have made it easier for witnesses to keep track of what happened. Instead, it seems to have created more confusion, with each person focusing on different aspects of Karlie's behavior. The car ride home becomes crucial evidence because it was potentially the last time anyone had a normal conversation with Karlie. Melissa's description of Karlie's paranoid behavior during that drive suggests that whatever happened at the party had lasting effects. This wasn't just a temporary reaction that wore off quickly. Karlie remained frightened and suspicious even after leaving the party environment. But what if Melissa's account of the car ride isn't entirely accurate? What if Karlie's behavior was different than described? Without other witnesses in the car, we only have Melissa's word about what happened during those crucial minutes. This creates another gap in the story that investigators would struggle to fill. But this chaotic evening was only the start. Morning witnesses would add a whole new layer of confusion. The truth is, we may never know exactly what happened during that panicked phone call that made Karlie so terrified. Every witness tells a completely different version of events, creating a maze of contradictory testimony. However, when Karlie finally arrived home that night, someone else was waiting to witness her condition firsthand. Father's dark suspicions. Accusations took one look at his daughter and knew something was terribly wrong. This wasn't the first time he'd seen his 16-year-old daughter under the influence of marijuana. But what he witnessed that October evening was something else entirely. Something dangerous. Zach would later describe Karlie's condition using that exact word, dangerous, and his immediate reaction would spark a theory that investigators still debate today. Zach had been a father long enough to recognize the difference between a teenager who'd smoked too much weed and a teenager who was genuinely in crisis. What he saw when Karlie walked through their front door fell into the second category. His suspicion formed almost instantly: someone had laced the marijuana with something sinister. This wasn't just paranoid parental thinking. Zach was looking at symptoms that didn't match anything he'd seen before from his daughter's previous marijuana use. The signs were impossible to ignore. Karlie's heart was racing so fast that Zach could practically see it pounding through her chest. Her breathing was rapid and shallow. But most disturbing was her mental state. She exhibited extreme paranoia that went far beyond typical marijuana effects. She wasn't just confused or giggly like someone who'd gotten too high at a party. She was genuinely terrified, convinced that someone was planning to kill her in her sleep. Think about that level of fear for a moment. This wasn't vague anxiety or typical teenage drama. Karlie was convinced that she would be murdered if she fell asleep. She stood in the corner of her room as if she were afraid of them, according to Zach's later interviews. The fear was so intense that it consumed her entire being. Every shadow seemed threatening. Every sound could be a potential killer approaching. Here's where Zach's theory becomes really interesting. The symptoms he observed didn't align with anything he knew about marijuana. The racing heart, intense fear, complete disconnection from reality, these pointed to something much more potent affecting his daughter's system. Based on the extreme paranoia and physical symptoms Zach was witnessing, he became convinced that someone at that party had deliberately given his daughter something dangerous. But here's the problem that would haunt this case forever. No toxicology report was ever conducted because Karlie disappeared before law enforcement could collect her blood. This missing piece of evidence left Zach's theory in limbo. Without scientific proof, investigators couldn't determine whether Karlie had been the victim of deliberate drugging or if she'd simply had an unusually severe reaction to regular marijuana. The missed opportunity to test for synthetic drugs or other substances would become one of the most frustrating aspects of this investigation. The timing of this missed opportunity couldn't have been worse. Modern toxicology tests can detect dozens of different substances, even days after consumption. A simple blood test could have answered the fundamental question about what caused Karlie's extreme reaction. Instead, that crucial window of evidence collection slammed shut when Karlie vanished the next morning. Other party attendees who smoked the same marijuana that night reported no similar reactions, which raises serious questions about Zach's laced marijuana theory. Donald Arrowood, Karlie's boyfriend, specifically stated that it was just marijuana, and that he and others experienced no adverse effects. If the marijuana had been laced with dangerous substances, wouldn't other people at the party have shown similar symptoms? This contradiction creates multiple possible explanations. Maybe Karlie received a different batch of marijuana than the others. Maybe someone specifically targeted her with a laced substance while giving regular marijuana to everyone else. Or maybe her reaction was caused by something else entirely, a combination of factors that created the perfect storm of paranoia and fear. Zach's protective instincts as a father might have influenced his interpretation of what he witnessed. When you see your child in distress, the natural response is to look for someone to blame. The idea that someone had deliberately drugged Karlie provided a concrete villain in a situation that otherwise felt random and terrifying. But was this father's intuition, or was he reaching for an explanation that made sense of an impossible situation? The physical evidence Zach observed, the racing heart, the rapid breathing, the disconnection from reality, these are real symptoms that point to serious drug intoxication. Whether that intoxication came from laced marijuana, drug interactions, or something else entirely remains unknown. But his description paints a picture of a teenager whose body was fighting something much stronger than THC. Zach's suspicions would remain just that, suspicions that pointed to something much more disturbing than anyone wanted to believe. But as the night progressed, someone else in the house would make a decision that would preserve Karlie's terrified state forever. The recording that captured terror, Melissa made a decision that would preserve Karlie's terrified state forever. As Karlie stood in their living room, consumed by terror and paranoia, Melissa pulled out her phone and hit record. She wanted to capture audio of her stepdaughter in this altered state so she could play it back the next day, hoping it would prevent future incidents. But the contents of that recording reveal something far more disturbing than a typical drug reaction. What Melissa captured wasn't just a confused teenager rambling about nothing. Instead, she recorded the voice of someone genuinely terrified for her life. The audio contains Karlie's words, spoken with unmistakable fear, expressing her conviction that someone was going to murder her. This wasn't abstract paranoia or vague anxiety. Karlie had formed a specific, terrifying belief about her immediate future. Here's where things get really unsettling. Karlie wasn't just paranoid about random threats or worried that bad things might happen eventually. She was specifically afraid that someone would kill her while she slept. During those recorded moments, you can hear a 16-year-old girl wrestling with the absolute certainty that closing her eyes would mean never waking up again. Imagine the mental anguish required to reach that level of fear, the kind of terror that makes sleep feel like a death sentence. The recording captures some truly disturbing statements from Karlie that night. At one point, she told her stepmother, "I really messed up today, to which Melissa responded, "We all do things in life that we regret. Drugs especially." But Karlie's next words painted a much darker picture of her mental state. "I'm just thinking all this demonic stuff. I can't help it," Karlie said during the recording. These words suggest that her mind was trapped in a cycle of horrific thoughts that she couldn't control or escape. The word demonic indicates that whatever she was experiencing felt supernatural or evil in nature. This wasn't someone complaining about feeling sick or disoriented from drugs. This was someone describing an internal battle against thoughts so dark they felt otherworldly. The paranoia extended beyond abstract fears to direct accusations against her own family. Karlie accused her stepmother of wanting to kill her, which prompted Melissa to respond, "Why would I kill you? That's preposterous." Consider how devastating this must have been for Melissa to hear. Here was a teenager she'd helped raise, someone she'd just rescued from a frightening party situation, now convinced that Melissa herself posed a mortal threat. But here's a crucial detail that has been misunderstood in many accounts of this case. Karlie didn't directly beg Melissa to call 911, as some versions of the story suggest. Instead, she asked, "If something bad happens, will you call 911?" This subtle but important difference changes our understanding of how urgent Karlie felt her situation was and how the family responded to her distress. She wasn't demanding immediate emergency intervention, she was seeking reassurance about what would happen if her fears came true. Dr. Phil, who later reviewed the audio during his investigation into the case, provided professional insight into what he heard. He stated that Karlie was clearly hallucinating and experiencing delusions, symptoms that would not have been caused by marijuana alone. This professional assessment directly supports Zach's theory that something more dangerous than cannabis was affecting his daughter's system that night. The level of paranoia and disconnection from reality captured in the recording pointed to something far beyond a typical marijuana reaction. The audio has never been released to the public, leaving investigators and family members as the only ones who truly know its contents. This secrecy has created intense speculation about what exactly was captured that night. Without being able to hear Karlie's voice ourselves, we're left to piece together her mental state from second-hand descriptions and partial quotes. Some people have questioned whether recording a teenager in such obvious psychological distress was the appropriate response. Should Melissa have been documenting Karlie's breakdown, or should she have been seeking immediate medical attention? The decision to record rather than call emergency services has become a point of controversy that continues to divide public opinion about the family's actions that night. What was captured in that audio recording? The sound of a terrified teenager convinced she was going to be murdered, speaking words that would become her final recorded statements. The recording preserved Karlie's voice expressing fears, so intense they consumed her entire being, fears about demonic thoughts, about being killed in her sleep, about the very people trying to help her. And then, before anyone could play the recording back to her, Karlie disappeared. 3 witnesses, 3 different stories. The morning of October 13, 2018, should have provided clear answers about Karlie's disappearance, but instead it created more questions than anyone could have imagined. 3 separate witnesses reported seeing someone matching Karlie's description in the hours after she vanished from her home, but their accounts paint completely different pictures of the same missing girl. Each sighting tells a different story about Karlie's final moments, and they can't all be true. The first witness was Richard Eddy, who lived near the Guse home and spotted someone early that morning around 6:30 a.m. at dawn. According to Eddy's account, he saw a tall, slender female with long hair walking by his house. But here's the detail that makes this sighting so intriguing: she was holding a piece of paper in her hand and looking up at the sky. Think about what this suggests. Someone carrying a paper might have a specific destination in mind, maybe an address or directions to somewhere important. The sky-gazing behavior could indicate she was searching for something or trying to get her bearings. The second witness completely changes our understanding of Karlie's mental state that morning. Kenneth Dutton, a schoolteacher, reported seeing Karlie walking toward Highway 6 around 7 to 7:15 a.m. Dutton also mentioned she was holding a piece of paper, which seems to confirm that detail across multiple sightings. But his observation about her direction of travel raises serious concerns about her intentions. Highway 6 isn't just any road, it's a major route that could take someone far from Bishop, California. Was Karlie trying to leave town? Was she attempting to hitchhike to somewhere specific? The third witness saw something that would become the most haunting piece of evidence in this entire case. This unnamed person reported seeing a girl matching Karlie's description standing in the sagebrush near Highway 6 itself around 7:30 a.m. This location would prove significant for a heartbreaking reason: it was the exact spot where tracking dogs would later lose Karlie's scent completely. Think about what that means. The dogs could follow her trail to this point, but then it simply vanished. What happened in that patch of sagebrush that caused Karlie's scent to disappear? Did she get into a vehicle? Did something prevent the dogs from following her trail further? The third sighting places Karlie at the very location where physical evidence of her presence ends forever. This witness essentially saw her at the point where she disappeared from the physical world. Here's the problem that investigators couldn't solve: these accounts describe completely different versions of the same girl. One witness saw a purposeful walk with paper in hand, another saw her headed toward the highway, and a third found her at the point where the trail dissolved. The behavioral descriptions from these witnesses don't match someone who was experiencing the level of terror Karlie displayed the night before. Remember, this was a girl who was convinced someone would murder her in her sleep. Yet the morning witnesses described someone who appeared to be moving with purpose, not someone fleeing in panic. The piece of paper becomes even more mysterious when you examine all three accounts together. Two witnesses specifically mentioned she was carrying something, but what was it? If it contained important information about her destination or the reason for her departure, why hasn't it ever been found? Did she drop it somewhere along her route? Did someone take it from her? Could it be possible that Karlie's mental state had stabilized overnight? Maybe whatever substances had affected her thinking the previous evening had worn off, leaving her clear-headed enough to make rational decisions about leaving. But if that's true, why would she leave without telling anyone? Why wouldn't she wake up her parents and explain where she was going? Now, consider this alternative explanation. What if these weren't three separate sightings of the same person, but rather three different people who happened to match Karlie's general description? In a small town like Bishop, multiple tall, slender females with long hair might fit the basic physical description witnesses provided. This possibility would explain the contradictory behavioral accounts, because they weren't all looking at Karlie. The tracking dog's inability to follow Karlie's scent beyond that final location near Highway 6 suggests something definitive happened there. Dogs are incredibly reliable at following human scent trails, so when they lose the trail completely, it usually means the person entered a vehicle or encountered some other significant change in their situation. But what was on that piece of paper, and why did her scent vanish there? Investigators would soon face more questions than answers. These conflicting eyewitness accounts would become a major obstacle for investigators trying to piece together her final hours. But while search teams combed the desert looking for answers, someone else was asking an entirely different question about where Karlie had really gone. Mother's devastating accusation Lindsay Fairley was asking a much darker question. What if everyone was looking in the wrong place? What if Karlie had never made it out of the Gusé house alive? Lindsay didn't just whisper these suspicions to close friends or family members. She wasn't afraid to say so publicly, and her accusations would tear this case wide open in ways no one expected. Lindsay's belief that her daughter never left the house alive wasn't based on gut feelings or maternal intuition. She had studied every detail of Melissa and Zach's story, and she found problems everywhere she looked. The timing didn't make sense. The decisions didn't add up. The whole narrative felt wrong to her, and she was determined to expose what she believed were lies designed to cover up something terrible. Her appearances on Dr. Phil in 2019 and Nancy Grace will expose a family torn apart by suspicion and accusations that went far beyond typical custody disputes. This wasn't just a divorced couple arguing about their child. This was a biological mother publicly accusing her daughter's father and stepmother of involvement in her disappearance. The national television audience watched as Lindsay laid out her case against the Gusé family with methodical precision. Lindsay questioned every single detail of Melissa and Zach's story, starting with the timeline of events that October night. When exactly did Karlie arrive home from the party? How long did they observe her distressed behavior? At what point did they decide she was safe enough to leave alone in her room? These weren't random questions from a grieving mother. Lindsay had identified specific inconsistencies in their accounts that she believed proved they were lying. Two key inconsistencies became the foundation of Lindsay's accusations. First, she alleged that the parents had changed their story about what Karlie was wearing when she disappeared. The clothing descriptions provided to investigators didn't match what family members initially reported, suggesting someone was altering crucial details after the fact. Second, Lindsay pointed to discrepancies about when family members claimed to have last seen Karlie, and what time they discovered she was missing. These timeline problems weren't minor details, they were fundamental contradictions that undermined the entire narrative. The decision to let Karlie sleep alone became a central focus of Lindsay's accusations. Here was a teenager who had spent hours convinced someone would kill her in her sleep, yet her parents left her alone in her room overnight. Lindsay couldn't understand how any responsible adult could make that choice. Why didn't they stay with her? Why didn't they take shifts watching over her? The decision seemed so fundamentally wrong that Lindsay believed it pointed to something sinister. Lindsay's most damaging accusation centered on the family's decision not to seek immediate medical attention for Karlie. A 16-year-old girl experiencing extreme paranoia, racing heart, and disconnection from reality should have been in an emergency room, not left to sleep it off at home. Lindsay believed this decision revealed either shocking negligence or deliberate avoidance of medical professionals who might have documented evidence of what really happened. The withholding of medical care became a cornerstone of her case against the family. The biological mother's accusations created a media firestorm, with public opinion split between supporting the grieving parents and believing Lindsay's darker theories. Some people saw Melissa and Zach as heartbroken parents dealing with an impossible situation, and a vindictive ex-wife. Others began to view them as potential suspects whose story contained too many holes to be believable. Lindsay's analysis of Melissa's recorded audio became particularly damaging to the family's credibility. She suggested that the recordings were made to mock Karlie rather than help her, painting Melissa as someone who was entertained by her stepdaughter's distress rather than concerned about her well-being. This interpretation transformed the audio from evidence of parental concern into something much more disturbing. Lindsay focused heavily on the fact that Karlie's phone and personal belongings were left behind at the house. A teenage girl running away would typically take her phone, she argued. The absence of these items suggested that Karlie never had the opportunity to pack or prepare for departure. Instead, Lindsay believed it indicated that something happened to Karlie before she could make any conscious decisions about leaving. During her Dr. Phil appearance, Lindsay expressed deep skepticism about the witness sightings that supposedly showed Karlie walking away from the house. She believed these accounts were either mistaken identity or deliberate misdirection designed to support the family's story. In her view, the real evidence pointed to something happening inside the Gusé home that final night. Lindsay's public campaign meant that investigators couldn't simply accept the family's account at face value. Her accusations forced law enforcement to search the Gusé home and analyze their phones for evidence. Her public doubts forced investigators to treat the Gusés not just as grieving parents, but as potential suspects. Investigators lose control. Chaos that followed would expose fundamental flaws in how this case was handled from the very beginning. What started as a missing person case in a small California town had spiraled into something much worse. A homicide detective would later describe the Karlie Gusé investigation using a word that should terrify anyone seeking justice. He called it a complete circus. But what exactly went so wrong with this investigation? How does a missing teenager case become so chaotic that law enforcement professionals use words like circus to describe their own work? The answer reveals a perfect storm of investigative failures, external pressures, and missed opportunities that may have permanently damaged any chance of finding the truth about what happened to Karlie. The FBI joined the investigation from day 2, which should have brought additional resources and expertise to the case. This federal involvement undercuts any claims that this was simply a small-town department overwhelmed by a complex case. With both local and federal investigators working together, there should have been enough manpower and experience to handle the situation properly. Instead, the early missteps became even more significant because they occurred despite having access to top-level investigative resources. The Mono County Sheriff's Department faced immediate criticism for their handling of evidence and their approach to potential leads. From the very beginning, there were signs that this investigation was heading in the wrong direction. Evidence collection was delayed at crucial moments when time mattered most. Think about what this means in a missing person case. Every hour that passes without proper evidence collection is another hour that crucial clues can be lost, contaminated, or destroyed by weather and human activity. One concrete example illustrates how leads went uninvestigated. When a YouTuber reported seeing a girl matching Karlie's description on a dirt bike, the sheriff's office dismissed the tip without proper follow-up. This wasn't just any random sighting, it was a specific, detailed report that deserved thorough investigation. Instead, the dismissive attitude toward this and other potential leads created a pattern that would haunt the investigation. How many other tips were ignored or not taken seriously? How many potential sightings were dismissed without proper follow-up? Inconsistencies in witness statements weren't properly addressed, creating a web of contradictory testimony that investigators never managed to untangle. Remember those 3 different accounts of Karlie's final morning. A competent investigation would have worked methodically to reconcile these differences, identifying which witnesses were reliable and which accounts could be verified through physical evidence or additional testimony. Instead, the contradictions were allowed to stand, creating confusion rather than clarity. The vast, unforgiving terrain around Bishop, California made search efforts challenging, but that wasn't the only problem investigators faced. The rugged landscape, including desert areas and mountainous terrain, created legitimate obstacles for search teams trying to cover such an enormous area. Weather conditions could destroy evidence quickly in this environment. But challenging terrain is something law enforcement deals with regularly in missing person cases. The real problem wasn't the landscape itself. Investigators were dealing with a media circus, family accusations, and public pressure that may have compromised their objectivity from the start. Lindsay Fairley's public accusations against the Gusé family created intense scrutiny of every decision investigators made. The national attention from shows like Dr. Phil meant that every move was being watched and criticized by people who had no understanding of proper investigative procedures. This external pressure can be devastating to an investigation. When detectives feel like they're being watched and judged by the public, they might make decisions based on public relations rather than solid police work. They might rush to conclusions to satisfy media demands for answers. They might avoid controversial investigative steps that could generate negative publicity but might be necessary to find the truth. The lack of security cameras in the rural area meant they had to rely entirely on conflicting witness testimony. Small towns across America deal with missing person cases without extensive camera coverage all the time. The key is properly interviewing witnesses, documenting their statements, and working systematically to verify or debunk their accounts. Instead, investigators seem to accept contradictory testimony without doing the hard work of figuring out which accounts were accurate. The timeline of events, particularly the time between when Karlie was last seen and when her stepmother realized she was missing, became a source of controversy that investigators never resolved. Basic facts about what time certain events occurred, what clothing Karlie was wearing, and when various family members last interacted with her remained unclear throughout the investigation. A detective later said the biggest clue is the lack of any clue, calling the case a circus. This connects back to Sergeant Clark's earlier observation about the absence of evidence being evidence itself. When basic procedures like securing the scene, reconciling timelines and vetting tips were skipped, could the truth ever surface? The detective's frank assessment reveals a level of dysfunction that goes far beyond the normal challenges of a difficult missing person case. Years would pass with these fundamental questions remaining unanswered, leaving everyone involved to wonder if the damage was irreversible. The investigation's collapse left behind a maze of competing narratives that investigators could never untangle. We have the party panic story, where Karlie became terrified after smoking marijuana at a gathering. There's her father's laced drug theory, supported by symptoms that seem far beyond normal cannabis effects. The morning sightings suggest she walked away purposefully, carrying mysterious paper. And her biological mother's devastating accusation that Karlie never left the house alive at all. The FBI continues offering a $5,000 reward for information, but 6 years have passed without answers. Each family member holds pieces of a puzzle that may never be complete. What's your theory about what really happened that October night? 6 years on, the question remains, who, if anyone, holds the real story of what happened to Karlie? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for updates on this and other Souls of Unsolved Mysteries.